Welcome back to Storytime.
ね、かわいそうでしょ?
She couldn't think of anything to say. What sort of choice was that? A certain death by your own hand, or madness and death by someone else's? The men that she'd encountered that winter night, had their lost thoughts as men been hopes that they might survive the madness? It sounded horrible.
簡単に強くなれる薬なんて便利だよね。実際は全然大したことなかったんだけど。
The smile never left his face, but she could see a spark of anger in his eyes. Although he'd never say as much, he was worried for Sinan. She was worried too. Was Sinan okay? Would he change? Her stomach was twisting itself into knots. At long last, morning came. One by one, the captains returned to the common room, tired and bleary-eyed from their long night. It was Inoue's entrance that broke the silence.
峠は越えたようだよ。
The room breathed a silent sigh of relief.
今はまだ寝てる。静かなもんだ。
三男さん、狂っちまってるのかい。
Inoue simply shook his head.
確かなことは起きるまでわからんな。見た目には昨日までと変わらないんだが。
That was when the door slid open.
おはようございます、皆さん。
The tension that had relaxed at Inoue's entrance pulled tight as Jerome. At least, she thought, they don't do this when she just walked into a room. Then she realized she was comparing herself to Ito, and wondered why on earth she would do something like that.
あら、顔色が優れませんのね。昨晩の騒ぎと何か関係がありまして？
His position wasn't just the result of politics then. There would be simply no ignoring the incident, it appeared.
いや、そうだな。
Desperately, Kondo's eyes flew across the room, looking for someone who might give him a story.
よし、ごまかせ、佐野。
あ、俺が？実は昨日。
大根役者は出しゃばらないでくれるかな。
Okuda's smile was bitter and thin. They sat back down.
そういうことは説明の上手な人に任せましょうね。
He looked at Saito expectantly, and the other man nodded once.
伊藤参謀がお察しの通り、昨晩、屯所内にて事件が発生しました。
Furthermore, he continued, the situation was grim. Saito then proceeded to outline as much of the truth as he could, his eyes never wavering from Ito's face.
参謀のお心に負荷をかけてしまう結果は、我々も望むところではありません。
By way of apology, he made a short bow.
今晩にでも改めた場を設け、お伝えさせていただきたく存じます。
まあ。
Ito's eyes narrowed as he looked slowly around the hall, a mischievous smile playing about his lips.
事情は分かりましたよ。今晩のお呼ばれ、心待ちにしておりますわ。
With another strange smile, Ito stood, nodded slightly, and left the room.
なんだか見逃してもらえたみたいだけど、もしかして斉藤君の対応が気に入ったのかな？
Yes, Saito had been respectful and, at least on the surface, forthcoming, both of which had likely pleased Ito. But what had he meant about letting it slide?
幹部が勢ぞろいしてる場に 三男さんだけいねえんだぞ。
She looked at him, confused.
あの人絡みで何か起きたってことぐらい伊藤ならすぐカンパできんだろうが。
Benito had likely guessed at what had taken place, but decided not to press the issue. She was beginning to see what Kondo saw in him. There was certainly no doubt that he was clever and observant. She looked up just in time to see Sinan shuffle through the door. His face was pale, but apart from that, he looked much like he always had.
三男さん、起きてていいのかい？
Sinan's only response was a small, sad smile.
少し気だるいようですね。これも薬の副作用でしょう。あの薬を飲んでしまうと日中の活動が困難になりますから。
In other words, it was working. Sinan was already transformed.
私はもう人間ではありません。
He smiled.
だ、君が生きていてくれてよかった。俺たちはそれで十分だと。
She could see the beginnings of tears well up in Kondo's eyes, but the rest of the men were more reserved. They were happy to see their friend alive, but what had his resurrection cost him?
それで腕は治ったんですか？
まだ本調子ではありませんから自分でもよくわからないのですが。
He lifted up his left arm, the arm that the day before had hung limp at his side, and flexed his hand.
治っているようですね。少なくとも不便がない程度には。
Thank goodness. He had gone through all of that, just to find his arm still lame and useless.
今の三男さんは昼間に弱いんだろう。そんな状態でタイムに参加できんのか？
If daylight drained one's energy, then living a normal life would be difficult enough. Never mind fighting alongside the Shinsengumi.
私は死んだことにすればいい。
His voice was calm, almost careless.
これから私は薬の成功例として新選組を束ねていこうと思っています。
それ本気か？自分が何言ってるのか分かってんのか？
分かっていますとも。長倉君こそ忘れたのですか？我々は薬の存在を伏せるよう幕府から命じられているのですよ。
Nagakura fell silent.
私さえ死んだことにすれば今までのように薬の存在は隠し通せる。
Leaving no room for argument, he continued.
薬から副作用が消えるのであればそれを使わない手はないでしょう。
To a man, they were against the idea, though none of them said anything. Who would want to consign a friend to a life of secrecy who lived in the shadows?
そもそも薬の実験は幕府からのお達しでもあるしな。
Sinan's suggestion might not have been pleasant, but it was logical. The drug was dangerous, yes, but if it could be refined, the side effects removed, it would be a powerful tool, powerful weapon.
それしかないか。
And with his word, it was decided.
三男さんが自分で選んだ道ですし、せめて責任を持って進んでください。
It wasn't exactly a vote of confidence, but Sinan simply responded with a smile.
短所移転の話、冗談では済まされなくなったな。三男さんを伊藤派の目から隠すには広い短所が必要だ。今のままでは狭すぎる。
Saito nodded.
薬による増強計画を立てるのであればなおのこと移転を急ぐべきかと思います。
Sanan's fate decided, they turned to a discussion of where they might take their new headquarters. Make their new headquarters. Derp derp. Whatever her status was, it did not extend to being included in that discussion. Living with the Shinsengumi for the past year had been quite an experience. Lately, she'd felt that perhaps it wasn't so bad, and her life had become almost fun. But the truth she couldn't escape was that she was only valuable to them because of her connection to her father, a truth they had made painfully clear to her. These men had lived with one another for years. Her own time with them amounted to little more than a drop in the bucket. They had no reason to treat her as anything more than a casual prisoner, or at best, a serving girl. She'd reminded herself of that countless times, but it only served to deepen her sense of loneliness. It had been 3 months since they moved the headquarters to Nishi Hongguanji. Buh! Wow, can't read. More room went, well, farther to walk. She'd walked through it every day for nearly every day for several weeks, and she was beginning to finally learn her way around. Buh! As she turned a corner near the back of the compound, she caught sight of someone sitting in the shadows.
Ah, 君でしたか。ありがとう。
But snow had disappeared. The cherry blossoms had bloomed and fled. And now the swallows and heat had come. Swallows are birds. Sanan and her exchanged a pair of smiles, and she held out her hands to let the breeze brush across them.
まあ今の私には風より日差しの強さの方が勘に触りますがね。
She hadn't thought that the sun was particularly strong that day, but to Sanan, who was to hide in the shadows or stay indoors during the day, it must have seemed unbearable. The night he'd changed, Sanan's hair had turned white, and in his eyes had been his thirst for blood. But to look at his peaceful smile now, it was hard to imagine that night had even been real. If someone had taken her aside and said it was all a bad dream, she would have believed them. It hadn't been a dream though, and now Sanan spends his days avoiding the sun, avoiding being seen and hiding from the sunlight. The Shinsengumi's greatest secret. For just a moment, the sun lit on Sanan's hair. She didn't know if it was a trick of the light, or simply her mind being foolish. But in that moment, his hair was a brilliant white.
どうかしましたか。幽霊でも見るような目で人を見るのは礼儀上あまり良いこととも思えませんが。
He looked perfectly normal now, of course. Surely, she thought, she must have simply imagined it. Even if she had, there's no denying that he was the same man who had gone mad with bloodlust. It was unnerving. Hakuoki and her made her way through the crowded, as usual, streets of Kyoto at a brisk pace.
ああ、そっかもな。俺長いこと江戸に行ってたし。俺が留守中、新八さんとか佐野さんにいじめられたりしなかったか？
She couldn't manage to suppress a short giggle.
にあるお前の家の場所聞いてたから、俺も立ち寄ってはみたんだけどな。
He couldn't seem to find the words he was looking for, and instead just kicked at a clump of dirt in frustration. Heisuke looked up in time to see her face fall, and gave her a good-natured pat on the shoulder.
まあ元気出せって。そのうちひょっこり会えるかもしれないし。ああ、そうだな。街も人も結構変わった気がするな。
The smile he put on to cheer her up a moment ago was gone. Nostalgia and melancholy weren't like him.
What?
Heisuke's head jerked up a fraction of a degree, and he looked across the street. He stood up on his toes and waved.
お、サージー、そっちはどうだった？
別に何も。普段通りだね。
Okita was out on patrol as well, although his route took him to a different part of the city than ours. Theirs. He gave her a short nod of acknowledgement, then looked back towards Heisuke with a snicker.
でも将軍上洛の時には忙しくなるんじゃないかな。そう、だから近藤さんも張り切ってるよ。
If the shogun was visiting, that was a chance for the Shinsengumi to be noticed. Kondo's reaction to that possibility was easy to imagine. She giggled.
ああ、うん。近藤さんはそうだろうな。
That didn't seem like Heisuke. Had something happened that she didn't know about? She looked over to Okita, hoping that he might help. But his face was tight with pain, and his coughing was getting worse. He glanced up, but his gaze swept past her across the street. His eyes narrowed at something behind her, and she turned in time to see a Ronin stumble backwards.
おい小娘、断るとはどういう了見だ。
やめてください。話して。
民草のために日々上位を論ずる我ら志士に尺の一つや二つ、むしろ自分からするのが当然であろうが。
Across the street, a clump of men, perhaps 3 or 4, were harassing a young girl. She didn't know what they were up to, but it didn't look pleasant. She felt Heisuke tense up next to her.
わかってるって。お前はここで待っ。
Before he could finish, a flash of blue cloth shot past them, towards a dangerous knot of men.
やれやれ、上位って言葉も君たちに使われるんじゃかわいそうだよ。
The usual crowd shuffled away from Okita and the men quickly as they could. None of them wanted to be nearby once words were put away in swords and sheaths. The Ronin's eyes found Okita's jacket, and the men stiffened.
浅黄色の羽織、新選組か。
知ってるなら話は早いよね。どうする？
His lips curled back into a predatory smile as his hand fell to the shaft of his sword. Haft of his sword. There was no mirth. There was no mirth in that rictus grin. The Ronin's faces abruptly grew several shades paler. They were only somewhat deflated, however, not entirely punctured, and the ringleader made one more attempt.
くそ、幕府の犬が。
いいからとっとと失せろって。
The sight of two of the Shinsengumi's notorious blue jackets standing shoulder to shoulder was apparently enough of an argument for the Ronin. The last of the color drained from their faces, and they turned tail and ran.
"どんな罪で？君は意外と過激だな."
He was right, of course. They'd had crime on their minds, certainly, but they hadn't actually committed one.
何しょげてるんだよ。それよりほら。
私、南雲薫と申します。助けていただいてありがとうございました。
She watched as the girl gave Okita a quick bow. She was so refined, so ladylike. Even dressed like a girl, she doubted she could ever be as elegant as her. She'd only just begun to feel sorry for herself when suddenly she felt a hand on her arm.
"いいから、この子の横に立って."
He shoved her next to the girl they'd just rescued, and stepped back to stroke his chin thoughtfully. She glanced nervously towards the girl, and gave her her best attempt at a smile under the circumstances. The smile she gave her in return was beautiful. There was something about it that seemed odd.
やっぱりよく似てるね、二人とも。
He seemed to be talking mostly to himself, but as soon as the words left his mouth, she had realized what seemed odd to her. And no, it was more than that. They were almost too much alike. It was almost as if she were looking into a mirror, but a mirror with a will of its own, and wearing much better clothes. The longer she looked at her, the more uncomfortable she felt. She shuddered.
そうか？俺は全然似てないと思うけどな。
いや、似てるよ。きっとこの子が女装したらそっくりになると思うな。
The girl, Kaoru, was looking straight at her, as if she hadn't heard a word Okita had said. She had to say something. But what? Perhaps she saw through her confusion, or perhaps it was something else.
もっときちんとお礼をしたいのですけれど、今は所用がありまして。ご無礼、ご容赦くださいね。
She bowed quickly to Okita.
このご恩はまたいずれ。新選組の沖田総司さん。
And with that, the girl who called herself Kaoru disappeared into the crowds of Kyoto, although the unease of her presence had created in her remained. With a mischievous grin, Heisuke dug a playful elbow into Okita's ribs.
おいおい、あれ掃除に気でもあるんじゃねえの？
今のがそう見えるんじゃ、平介君は一生佐野さんとかに勝てないよね。
どういう意味だよ。
Their back and forth continued, but her mind was elsewhere. Last night's rain had left a number of puddles on the road, and just when she looked up at them, she saw a strange girl who looked just like her. Wind caught the surface of the puddle, sending a flurry of ripples across it. Her face quirked into a small smile, but the face in the puddle didn't smile back.
そろそろ帰ろうぜ。
Wasting no more time on a puddle, she turned and ran towards Heisuke and Okito, already on their way back to headquarters. The temple was much larger than the compound of Mibu, as advertised. The entire Shinsengumi can gather in the new common room with space to spare. And so next time, we'll get a look at the new base. Or something along those lines, I don't know. Find out. Till then, bye-bye.